On a frozen winter night, a young police officer collapsed alone on a snow-covered park bench, her breath shallow, her body failing. The storm hid the truth, but it was no accident. Poison had been meant to silence her forever. As the town slept, a former Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd crossed her path, turning a quiet walk into a fight for a town's soul. This was not rescue by chance. It was the moment winter chose its witnesses. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. Winter had settled heavily over Ridgewood Falls, a small mountain town tucked into the northern spine of Colorado. At night, the town seemed to shrink beneath the weight of snow, its streets narrowed by tall white banks, its sounds muted as if the world itself were holding its breath. Street lights cast pale halos onto drifting flakes, and every footstep echoed too loudly, then vanished too quickly. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, the kind of cold that crept through layers of fabric and settled into bone. Pine Hollow Park lay at the edge of downtown, a modest stretch of frozen paths, bare trees, and wooden benches dusted thick with snow. In summer, it was full of laughter and dogs and children. Tonight, it was empty, silent except for the whisper of falling snow and the faint creak of branches bending under ice. Officer Lily Hart moved along the main path with careful, measured steps. She was 27, lean and athletic, with dark brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail beneath her winter police cap. Her face was youthful but serious, her features sharp in the cold, cheeks flushed from the wind. The Ridgewood Falls Police Department badge on her chest caught the light each time she passed beneath a lamp. Lily had been on duty for nearly 12 hours, a double shift. 2 minor traffic incidents, 1 domestic call that had ended in tears but no arrests, and endless paperwork waiting back at the station. Her shoulders ached beneath her insulated jacket, and her fingers burned despite the thermal gloves. Still, she kept walking. She believed in being visible. That belief was part of why she had transferred here in the first place. Ridgewood Falls was quiet, but quiet towns still needed people willing to walk their streets at night, people willing to be seen. The cold bit harder as she reached the center of the park. Lily slowed, exhaling a thin cloud of breath, and paused near one of the benches. Something felt off? Not a sound, not a movement. Just a pressure at the base of her skull, the faint sensation of being watched. She turned her head slightly, scanning the dark tree line. Snow clung to the branches, heavy and unmoving. No footsteps, no figures, just white and shadow. "Get a grip," she murmured under her breath. Her radio crackled softly at her shoulder, static, then silence. Lily adjusted it absently and took another step. That was when the dizziness hit. It came without warning, a sudden tilt of the world that made the light smear and stretch. Lily staggered, her gloved hand flying out to catch the back of the bench. Her heart began to race, not steadily, but erratically. One hard beat, then another too fast, then a flutter that stole her breath. "What the—" Her voice faltered. Heat surged up her neck, followed immediately by a deep, nauseating chill. Her vision narrowed, darkening at the edges. Lily tried to straighten, tried to key her radio, but her fingers wouldn't respond the way she expected. They felt clumsy, disconnected. She sank down onto the bench, snow crunching beneath her weight. Her breathing turned shallow. Each inhale felt incomplete, like her lungs refused to fully expand. A sharp metallic taste filled her mouth. She swallowed, then coughed. White foam gathered at the corner of her lips. Panic flared, brief and bright. Lily knew enough first aid and enough about her own body to understand this was not simple hypothermia. Something was very wrong. Her head lolled forward. The radio slid uselessly against her shoulder. Snow continued to fall, settling into her hair, her lashes, the fabric of her uniform. Across the park, another pair of figures moved through the dark. Ethan Cole walked with his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his heavy winter coat, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. At 29, he carried himself with a quiet economy of motion, every step deliberate, balanced. He was tall, lean, broad-shouldered without bulk, the build of someone shaped by years of disciplined physical training. His dark hair was cut short, practical, and his face, clean-shaven, angular, bore the faint weariness of someone who slept poorly. He walked at night because it was the only time his mind ever truly slowed. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. When it did, it was shallow, crowded with memories he preferred to keep buried. Walking helped. The cold helped. The silence helped. At his side padded Rook, a full-grown German shepherd with a thick sable coat dusted white by snow. The dog moved with controlled confidence, head level, ears alert but relaxed. His amber eyes swept the park methodically, not with nervous energy, but with calm awareness. The leash between them hung loose, more a formality than a necessity. Rook slowed suddenly. Ethan noticed immediately. He stopped without thinking, his attention shifting fully to the dog. Rook's ears lifted, body stiffening just slightly. Not alarm. Focus. "What is it?" Ethan asked quietly. Rook's nose lifted into the air, nostrils flaring. Then he turned, pulling gently but insistently toward the bench at the center of the park. Ethan followed, boots crunching softly over snow. As they drew closer, he saw the shape slumped on the bench. Dark uniform, stillness that didn't belong. "Hey," Ethan called, his voice carrying just enough to test for response. "You okay?" No movement. Rook let out a low, restrained whine and tugged harder now. Ethan closed the distance quickly. The closer he got, the clearer the details became. The unnatural angle of her posture, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the foam at her mouth catching the light. "Shit," he breathed. He moved fast, but not frantically. Kneeling in front of the bench, he took in everything at once. The police insignia, the flushed skin, the rapid fluttering pulse visible at her neck. This was not someone simply cold. "Easy," he murmured, though he wasn't sure whether he meant her or himself. Ethan slipped one arm behind Lily's shoulders and gently guided her forward, tilting her head to keep her airway clear. With the other hand, he shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her torso, blocking the wind. He checked her breathing. Too shallow. Too irregular. "Rook, stay," he ordered softly. The dog sat immediately, close enough that his body shielded her legs from the wind, eyes fixed on her face. Ethan pulled his phone free with numb fingers and dialed emergency services. His voice was calm, clipped, precise as he relayed their location and her condition. He didn't speculate. He didn't dramatize. He described what he saw. As he waited for confirmation, his gaze flicked downward and froze. Near the bench, half covered by fresh snow, were footprints that didn't match Lily's patrol pattern. Larger, heavier, the tread unfamiliar. They led away from the bench toward the tree line, already softening under the falling snow. Ethan's jaw tightened. He reached for Lily's gloved hand to keep it warm, and caught a faint, sharp scent beneath the leather. Chemical. Clean. Wrong. His eyes lifted, scanning the dark beyond the lamps, the quiet park suddenly feeling much smaller, much less empty. This wasn't an accident. The calm he'd cultivated for months slipped away, replaced by something older, sharper. His posture changed subtly, shoulders squaring, senses narrowing. Somewhere deep inside, a switch flipped. Ethan Cole had come out for a walk, but the man kneeling in the snow now was something else entirely. And whatever had been done to this young officer, whoever had thought the winter would erase their tracks, had made a mistake. The ambulance lights washed Ridgewood Falls in pulsing red as it tore through the snow-choked streets. The town's storefronts, dark, shuttered, half buried in drifts, flashed and disappeared behind curtains of blowing white. Above the windshield, the sky was a lid of iron-gray cloud, pressing down as if winter meant to keep everything sealed and silent. Inside the ambulance, the air smelled of antiseptic and heated plastic. Officer Lily Hart lay strapped to a stretcher, her face pale beneath the harsh overhead light. The foam at her mouth had been wiped away, but her lips still held a faint bluish tinge that made the medic's jaw tighten. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths, the kind that looked more like a body trying to remember how to live than a body truly living. Ethan Cole sat on the bench seat opposite, one gloved hand braced against the wall each time the vehicle hit ice. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't supposed to be here. Yet the medic had taken one look at the way he had managed Lily's airway in the park and allowed him to ride. Rook lay on the floor between Ethan's boots, calm and watchful, his ears tracking the medic's movements. Snow had melted into his coat, leaving dark patches along his back. When the stretcher rattled, Rook's head lifted. When Lily's breathing hitched, his nostrils flared as if he could smell the danger inside her lungs. Her heart rate spiking again, the medic muttered, voice tight. He was a stocky man in his 40s with a tired face and a steady hands-only kind of confidence. His name tag read Darren Pike. He moved with practiced efficiency, but his eyes kept flicking to the monitor like it might suddenly tell him something new. Ethan watched the numbers and felt a familiar cold logic start assembling itself in his mind. Rapid, irregular pulse, shallow breathing, white foam. That wasn't just cold. That was chemistry. "You see this often?" Ethan asked. Darren snorted once, humorless. "In Ridgewood Falls, we see drunk tourists and frostbite, not this?" Lily's radio, still clipped to her jacket, crackled softly. Static. No voice. It sounded like a throat trying to form words and failing. The ambulance swerved into the hospital bay. Doors burst open. Cold air slammed in, sharp as broken glass. The stretcher rolled out, swallowed by a small team waiting beneath fluorescent lights. Ridgewood Valley Hospital was not a large place. It was the kind of hospital built for broken wrists from ski slopes and older lungs fighting winter, not for poison. Ethan followed as far as he could until a nurse held up a hand. "Sir," she began. She was in her early 30s with warm brown skin and dark hair pulled into a neat bun beneath her cap. Her expression was gentle but firm, the kind of firmness that had kept her calm through too many midnight emergencies. Her badge read, Nora Kim, RN. "I brought her in," Ethan said, voice low. "She collapsed in Pine Hollow Park, foam at the mouth. She was freezing." Nora's eyes flicked over him, tall, tense, snow on his shoulders, the look of someone who had been awake too long. Then her gaze dropped to the German shepherd sitting obediently at his heel. "Your dog?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "He found her." Nora's firmness softened by a fraction. "Okay, you can wait in the family area. I'll get someone to take a statement after she's stabilized." Rook's nails clicked on the tile as Ethan guided him away. The dog didn't resist, but he kept looking back toward the trauma bay doors until they swung shut with a final heavy sound. In the waiting area, time stretched oddly, as if the hospital clock had been slowed by snow outside. The television mounted in a corner played a silent weather report, more accumulation overnight, wind advisories, ice warnings. A paper cup of coffee sat untouched on a table, cooling into bitterness. Ethan remained standing. Sitting felt like surrender. Rook settled beside him, posture composed, head up, eyes alert. When a nurse passed, Rook didn't lunge or bark. He simply watched, cataloging the world with the quiet discipline of an animal trained to notice what people missed. Ethan's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't pull it out. He didn't want any outside voice intruding on the tight, sterile tension here. A set of double doors opened, and a man in a white coat stepped out, scanning the waiting area. He was tall and thin with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that sat low on his nose. His expression was controlled, but his brow carried the slight furrow of a doctor who didn't like what he'd found. His badge read, Dr. Simon Vance, Emergency Medicine. "Who came in with Officer Hart?" he asked. Ethan stepped forward. "I did." Dr. Vance studied him, then glanced down at Rook. "You family?" "No." "Then I'll be brief." Dr. Vance's voice had the clipped precision of someone trained to say difficult things without drama. "She's alive, but she's in critical condition. We're treating severe hypothermia, and we're also dealing with something else." Ethan didn't blink. "Poison." Dr. Vance's eyes narrowed slightly, as if that answer cost him a little. "We suspect a neurotoxin, not the kind we see with street drugs. Her pupils are constricted, her breathing is compromised, and her cardiovascular response is unusual." "Unusual how?" Ethan asked. "Adaptive, Doctor," Vance said, and that word landed strangely in the sterile hallway. "It's like her body is fighting, but the toxin keeps finding a way around the support we're giving." Ethan's fingers curled slowly inside his gloves. In his mind, a different air filled his lungs, dry, hot, tasting of dust and metal. A different monitor beeped in a different world. A teammate's laugh turned into a cough, then into silence. A voice in a headset calling for extraction that never came fast enough. He pushed the memory down before it could rise fully. "Can you identify it?" Ethan asked. "Not yet," Dr. Vance replied. "We've sent samples to the state lab, but that'll take time. Right now, we're stabilizing her, keeping her breathing, warming her core. If she makes it through the next few hours, her odds improve." Ethan nodded once, the motion stiff. "She'll make it." Dr. Vance held his gaze a moment longer, then sighed softly. "Officer Hart's department has been notified. Someone will be here soon." As the doctor walked away, Ethan felt the hospital around him sharpen into something else. This wasn't random, not with that word. Neurotoxin? And not with the way Lily's body reacted. His mind kept reaching for a file he hadn't opened in years. Rook rose quietly and nudged Ethan's hand, then turned his head toward the corridor that led to the trauma bay. His ears pricked and he inhaled deeply. A hospital orderly passed by, carrying Lily's outer jacket in a clear plastic evidence bag. The jacket still held the scent of pine snow and cold air, and beneath it something faint and sterile, like a solvent that didn't belong in winter. Rook's body tensed. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but a warning meant to inform. His eyes tracked the bag as it moved. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You smell it too," he murmured. A new presence entered the waiting area with purposeful stride. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark duty jacket over plain clothes, the kind of practical layer a working cop chose when he didn't expect to sit behind a desk. His hair was cut short and graying at the temples. His face looked carved from tired granite, but his eyes were sharp, measuring. He carried a folder under one arm and a winter hat in his hand. He stopped in front of Ethan. "You the guy who found her?" His voice was rough but controlled, as if the words had to push through exhaustion and anger. He held himself with quiet authority, the kind built over years of making decisions that didn't always have good outcomes. "I did," Ethan said. The man looked at Rook. "And that dog?" "Mine." "Name?" the man asked. "Ethan Cole," Ethan replied. He chose not to volunteer anything else. The man nodded slowly. "Detective Caleb Rourke, Ridgewood Falls PD." His gaze flicked over Ethan again, taking in his posture, the stillness, the way he didn't fidget. "Officer Hart's one of ours. Tell me what happened." Ethan gave him the facts, clean and exact. Where she'd been, how she'd looked, the foam, the cold, the footprints near the bench, the faint chemical odor on her glove. At the mention of footprints, Detective Rourke's expression tightened. At the mention of chemical odor, his eyes sharpened further, and something behind his gaze shifted into darker focus. When Ethan finished, Rourke exhaled slowly and opened the folder. Inside were a few printed pages, a photo, and a short report. "She's been working something," Rourke said, as if choosing each word carefully. Not officially assigned. More like, she wouldn't let it go. Ethan didn't ask yet. He waited. Rourke's thumb tapped the top page. "A local crew, small time on paper, but they used to run with a bigger outfit before their leader died in prison a few months back." He paused, watching Ethan's face for reaction. Lily believed they'd started moving again. Ethan felt the muscles in his neck draw tight. He kept his voice neutral. "And you think this is them?" "I don't know what I think," Rourke admitted. For the first time, a sliver of something human broke through the professional mask. Worry, sharpened into anger. "But I've never seen an officer collapse like that from cold, not with foam. Not with a pulse doing gymnastics?" Rourke's ears turned toward the entrance, and Ethan followed his gaze. Outside the hospital's glass doors, the parking lot was a world of snow and sodium light. Cars sat half-buried, silent, and blanketed. For a moment, everything looked still. Then a vehicle rolled slowly past the entrance. An older, dark pickup truck, headlights dimmed low, moving with unnatural care. It didn't park. It didn't stop. It simply passed, as if taking a long look. Ethan felt his focus lock onto it. Rourke didn't notice. He was still staring at his folder, thinking like a detective. Ethan watched the truck drift through the lot and disappear behind the snowfall. A cold understanding settled in Ethan's chest, heavier than the winter outside. Whoever had done this wasn't finished. And now, for reasons Ethan couldn't yet name, they had begun to notice him too. Snow fell harder the following night, thick and relentless, as if the mountains themselves were trying to bury Ridgewood Falls in white. The lake at the town's edge, Mirror Lake, locals called it, had frozen into a dull sheet of gray ice, cracked in places where pressure shifted beneath the surface. Wind skated across it, carrying the scent of pine, cold metal, and something else Ethan Cole could not quite name. He stood at the tree line overlooking the lake, breath slow, posture still. Rourke waited beside him, leash loose, body angled forward with quiet intent. The German shepherd's nose dipped toward the ground, then lifted, sampling the air in short, precise breaths. Snow clung to the fur along his shoulders, melting slowly from the heat beneath. "Easy," Ethan murmured, barely audible. Rourke didn't move, but his tail stiffened slightly. He had found it. The scent trail was faint, almost erased by wind and fresh snowfall. But it was there, layered beneath the clean smell of ice and water. Sterile. Sharp. Wrong. The same note that had lingered on Lily Hart's jacket now pulled them forward, step by careful step, along the frozen shoreline. Ethan moved like a man who had learned long ago how to disappear into terrain. He kept to shadow, avoided open ground, and let the dark do most of the work. The town lights glowed faintly behind him, distant and unaware. Ahead, near the far end of the lake, stood a low, rectangular shape half buried by snow. A storage warehouse. It had once belonged to a summer outfitting company, kayaks, canoes, rental gear for tourists, but it had been abandoned for years. Its metal siding was rust-streaked, the windows dark, the main door chained shut. A narrow service path curved around the back toward the lake, barely visible under the drifts. Ethan stopped again. Rourke's ears rotated forward. His body lowered just enough to signal readiness, not aggression. Someone was there. Ethan shifted his weight, scanning the area. The wind carried a low murmur. Voices, muffled by scarves and distance. Two figures moved near the rear corner of the building, their silhouettes breaking briefly against the lighter gray of the ice. They weren't dressed like tourists. Dark jackets, hoods pulled low. One leaned against the wall, shoulders relaxed in a way that spoke of boredom, not caution. The other paced slowly, boots crunching too loudly for someone who cared about being quiet. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Guards. He backed away a few steps, crouching behind a fallen pine, and slipped the leash free from his wrist. He didn't release Rourke, but he loosened control just enough to let the dog think. "Watch," Ethan whispered. Rourke's gaze never left the warehouse. Ethan waited for the moment when the pacing guard turned his back. It came sooner than expected. Ethan moved. He crossed the open ground fast and low, boots finding purchase where ice met frozen dirt. The first guard noticed too late. Just a flicker of movement before Ethan drove a shoulder into his chest, slamming him hard against the metal siding. The impact rang out, sharp and loud, echoing across the lake. The second guard reacted instantly. He lunged forward, swinging something heavy. A metal rod, maybe a tire iron. Ethan twisted, but the blow clipped his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain down his arm. White sparks flashed behind his eyes. He grunted, teeth clenched, but didn't go down. Rook moved before Ethan could speak. The German shepherd launched forward in a blur of muscle and snow, colliding with the second guard at knee height. The man shouted as his legs were taken out from under him. He hit the ground hard, the metal rod skidding across the ice. Rook didn't bite. He planted his weight, jaws clamped firmly around the man's forearm just below the elbow, careful pressure designed to immobilize, not tear. The guard screamed, trying to pull free, but Rook adjusted, pinning him with controlled force. Ethan recovered quickly, adrenaline burning through the pain in his shoulder. He drove an elbow into the first guard's ribs as the man tried to recover, knocking the air from his lungs. The guard collapsed, coughing, clutching his side. "Don't move," Ethan said, voice cold and steady. The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. The man under Rook had gone still, face pale, breath ragged. His eyes darted between Ethan and the dog, calculating the cost of another attempt. Ethan stepped closer, boot nudging the fallen metal rod, farther out of reach. Rook held his position, muscles taut, eyes locked on the man beneath him. Snow dusted his muzzle, melting with each slow breath. "Release," Ethan said. Rook loosened his grip just enough to allow the man to pull his arm back, then remained standing over him, blocking any attempt to rise. Ethan crouched and frisked the first guard quickly. No badge, no ID, just a cheap burner phone, a folding knife, and a set of keys. "Who are you guarding?" Ethan asked. The man spat blood into the snow and laughed weakly. "You picked the wrong night to go hiking." Ethan didn't respond. He stood, rolling his shoulder once. Pain flared, sharp and insistent, but the joint held. "Stay," he told Rook. He moved toward the warehouse door. The chain had been cut recently. Inside, the air was colder than outside, stale and metallic. A single lantern burned on a folding table, casting harsh light across the concrete floor. Plastic containers lined one wall, some empty, others filled with clear liquid. A makeshift workbench stood near the back, cluttered with tubing, gloves, and glassware. Ethan's eyes went to the floor. A small glass vial lay near the drain, cracked and empty. Its interior was coated with a chalky white residue. His jaw tightened. He knelt, pulling on a glove before lifting it carefully. The smell was unmistakable now. Clean, biting, wrong in a way that made his skin prickle. This was the same thing that had nearly killed Lily. Outside, Rook let out a low warning sound. Ethan turned just in time to see the second guard scramble to his feet and run, boots slipping on ice as he bolted toward the tree line. Rook strained forward, ready to pursue, but Ethan shook his head. "No," he said sharply. Rook stopped instantly, though every line of his body screamed chase. Ethan watched the man disappear into the snow. He didn't like letting someone run. But tonight wasn't about arrests. It was about understanding the shape of the threat. He stepped back outside, breathing slow, eyes sweeping the dark. The two guards had been a screen, nothing more. Whoever was behind this didn't plan to be here tonight, or hadn't planned to stay. Ethan looked out across the frozen lake, the town lights glowing faintly beyond it. This wasn't about one officer, or even one crime. Someone was testing something, measuring reach, practicing silence. At the hospital, warmth hummed softly through pipes in the walls. Machines beeped in steady rhythms that sounded almost like reassurance. Lily Hart's eyes fluttered open. Light hurt. Her throat burned, dry and raw, and her limbs felt like they belonged to someone else. She tried to move and failed. "Easy," a voice said gently. She turned her head slightly and saw Nurse Nora Kim standing beside the bed, expression careful but kind. "You're safe," Nora said. "Don't try to talk yet." Lily swallowed, wincing. Images drifted through her mind. Snow, cold, the taste of metal. And beneath it all, a sound, a voice, her brow furrowed as she struggled to focus. "There's someone," she rasped, the words barely forming. Nora leaned closer. "Take your time." Lily's breathing hitched. "I know the voice." The words landed like a stone. Detective Caleb Rourke, standing near the door, straightened. His tired eyes sharpened. "You remember who it was?" Lily shook her head weakly. "Not the face. The voice? I've heard it before." He was calm. Too calm. Rourke exchanged a look with Nora. "From a case?" Lily closed her eyes, concentrating. "He talked to me once, months ago, about a group that didn't want to stay small." Silence settled over the room, heavy with implication. Back at the lake, Ethan knelt in the snow, staring at the empty vial in his gloved hand. His shoulder throbbed in time with his pulse, a reminder that he wasn't untouched. Rook stood beside him, steady and solid, breath fogging the air. Ethan straightened slowly. He had tried to walk away from this town's problems, tried to be just a man with a dog and too many sleepless nights. But this wasn't something he could ignore. He looked toward the distant glow of Ridgewood Falls, jaw set, eyes hardening with resolve. Civilian or protector? The line had just blurred. The storm arrived like a living thing. Snow didn't fall so much as it was thrown, hurled sideways by a wind that screamed across Mirror Lake, stripping heat from anything foolish enough to stand exposed. Visibility collapsed to a handful of yards. The frozen surface groaned beneath shifting pressure, deep cracks hidden under fresh drifts, like veins beneath pale skin. Ethan Cole moved into it anyway. He kept low, shoulders hunched against the gale, boots biting carefully into the ice where powder had been swept clean. Pain pulsed through his right shoulder with every step, sharp and insistent, but he ignored it. Adrenaline and focus burned hotter than the cold. Rook stayed close, body angled slightly forward, moving when Ethan moved, stopping when he stopped. Disciplined. Silent. Utterly present. Ahead, the lake narrowed near its southern edge, where a concrete structure rose from the ice like a half-buried bunker. It was the auxiliary water intake station, old and rarely used in winter, feeding a secondary line that connected back into Ridgewood Falls' main system. Most people in town barely remembered it existed. Someone else remembered very well. A single floodlight glowed weakly near the structure, its beams smeared by snow. Shapes moved within it. Dark figures, hurried and tense. Ethan counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then a fifth, stepping out of the structure with a compact pistol held low at his side. 5. Rook's ears flattened, breath fogging in short bursts. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, voice nearly lost to the wind. The group worked fast. One man struggled with a valve wheel at the edge of the intake, gloved hands slipping on metal rimed with ice. Another crouched beside an open equipment case, pulling out tubing and a sealed container marked only with a strip of red tape. The leader, the man with the pistol, stood slightly apart, scanning the white chaos around them, posture alert, jaw tight. They were accelerating. The storm wasn't just cover. It was a clock. Ethan moved along the lake's uneven surface, using snowbanks and pressure ridges as concealment. He didn't rush. He waited for the wind to howl louder, for the moment when sound and sight failed at the same time. Then he went. He came in from the left, low and fast, closing the distance in seconds. The first man noticed only when Ethan's shoulder slammed into him, driving him down hard onto the ice. The impact knocked the breath from the man's lungs in a sharp, panicked gasp. A shout went up immediately. The second man swung a flashlight like a club. Ethan twisted, caught the wrist, and drove an elbow into the man's throat. He went down choking, hands clawing uselessly at the air. Rook moved at a single, sharp gesture of Ethan's hand. The German shepherd launched forward, skidding slightly before correcting, body slamming into the third man's legs. He went down with a curse, gun skittering across the ice. Rook was on him instantly, pinning him chest down, jaws locked onto the thick fabric of his sleeve. Pressure without tearing, control without frenzy. The pistol cracked. The sound was thunderous in the confined chaos, the muzzle flash a brief, violent bloom of light. Ethan dropped flat as the shot tore overhead. Ice exploded inches from his head, shards spraying his face. The leader shouted something Ethan couldn't hear over the wind and raised the gun again. Ethan rolled, came up on one knee, and hurled a chunk of broken ice hard and fast. It caught the gunman in the face, snapping his head back. The second shot went wild, disappearing into the storm. Two more men rushed him together, one with a knife, the other with a heavy wrench. Ethan backed toward a pressure ridge, using the uneven ground to break their timing. The knife slashed where he had been a moment earlier. Ethan pivoted, caught the man's wrist, and drove him face first into the ice. The wrench came down, glancing off Ethan's injured shoulder. White-hot pain flared. Ethan grunted, teeth clenched, and answered with a brutal knee to the attacker's midsection. The man folded, retching, collapsing onto his side. "Down!" Ethan shouted, though whether anyone heard him or not didn't matter. The leader recovered faster than Ethan liked. He sprinted for the intake valve, pistol clutched tight, boots slipping but momentum carrying him forward. His gloved hand grabbed the wheel, muscles straining as he began to turn it open. At the hospital, far from the storm, a radio crackled softly beside Lily Hart's bed. She lay propped up against pillows, skin still pale, but eyes sharp with focus. A thin nasal cannula fed oxygen into her lungs. Detective Caleb Rourke stood near the foot of the bed, listening intently, his expression grim. "Auxiliary intake, Mirror Lake." A voice hissed through static. Lily's heart kicked harder. "No," she whispered, then louder, forcing air through her throat. "That's it." Rourke turned. "What?" "The waterline," Lily said, voice rough but urgent. "I saw it on a map during that case. They talked about it like a back door. Easy to forget. Easy to poison." The radio flared again, wind roaring over the transmission. Lily reached out, fingers shaking, and grabbed the mic. "Ethan, don't let him turn it all the way. There's a manual bypass. Once it's open, it feeds straight into town." Back on the lake, Ethan heard her voice break through the storm, thin but unmistakable. "Rook!" he shouted. The German shepherd released his hold instantly and spun toward the intake, sprinting hard despite the slick surface. The leader turned at the sound, eyes widening just as Rook launched. The pistol came up. The shot rang out. Rook hit the man mid-torso, taking him off his feet. The bullet tore across Rook's shoulder, punching through muscle and fur in a spray of dark blood that vanished into the snow. The dog yelped. A sharp, shocked sound, but didn't release. They slid together across the ice, crashing into the concrete base of the intake station. The valve wheel spun back a fraction under the impact, metal shrieking. Ethan was on them in seconds. He drove the butt of the fallen pistol into the leader's jaw, hard and precise. The man went limp, collapsing onto the ice, breath steaming in ragged bursts. Ethan kicked the gun away and dropped to one knee beside Rook. "Stay with me," he said, voice low and urgent. Rook trembled, blood darkening his coat, but his eyes stayed locked on Ethan's face. He tried to stand and nearly fell. Ethan pressed his glove hard against the wound, applying pressure. "Good boy. Stay." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, muffled by the storm. Too far. Too slow. Ethan looked at the valve. It was still partially open. He rose, ignoring the pain screaming through his shoulder, and threw his weight into the wheel, muscles straining as ice bit into his gloves. The metal resisted, frozen and stubborn, but it moved. Inch by inch, the valve turned back into place. The container near the intake lay shattered, its contents spilled uselessly onto the ice, quickly buried by snow. When Ethan stepped back, chest heaving, the only sounds left were the wind and Rook's labored breathing. The other men lay scattered across the lake, some groaning, some still, all alive. Ethan knelt again beside Rook, pulling his coat free and wrapping it tightly around the dog's shoulder, binding the wound as best he could. "Help's coming," he said, more promise than certainty. Red and blue lights finally bled through the whiteout as police vehicles crawled onto the lake's edge, officers moving cautiously, weapons raised, disbelief written across their faces. Ethan didn't look at them. He kept his hand on Rook, eyes fixed on the dark water beneath the ice. He hadn't chased anyone. He hadn't finished anything beyond what needed finishing. The town was safe. That was enough. Winter did not leave Ridgewood Falls all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, as if unwilling to release a town that had learned to endure it. Snowbanks shrank day by day, retreating from sidewalks and storefronts. The lake ice cracked and sighed beneath the pale sun, water showing through like dark glass. The air still bit at dawn, but by afternoon it carried something new. Damp earth, pine resin, the faint promise of change. In the county courthouse, warmth hummed through old radiators as the last of the hearings concluded. The men arrested at Mirror Lake sat in identical chairs, shoulders hunched, wrists cuffed, eyes hollow. They no longer looked dangerous, just small. Evidence had stacked against them with relentless clarity. Chemical traces, surveillance fragments, witness accounts, a chain of intent that led directly to the poisoned glove and the intake valve beneath the ice. The charges were heavy. Attempted murder, conspiracy, terroristic endangerment. The name of their dead leader surfaced again and again, dragged into the light, stripped of myth. When the judge spoke, there was no drama, just consequence. Outside, the town breathed out. Lily Hart stood at the edge of Memorial Park with her hands tucked into the pockets of her winter coat. She had lost weight during her recovery, her face slimmer, her movements more deliberate, but her posture was straight. Her dark hair was pulled back into a practical knot, a habit she hadn't broken even out of uniform. The bench waited beneath the old oak. It had been scrubbed clean, repainted by city workers who hadn't been asked to do it but did anyway. Fresh wood slats gleamed faintly under a thin crust of frost. The plaque at the end, dedicated decades ago to a firefighter lost in the line of duty, had been polished until it reflected the sky. Lily stopped a few steps short. Her heart kicked harder than she expected. The park was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic and the creak of branches shifting overhead. The bench looked harmless now. Ordinary? It didn't feel that way. She closed her eyes, breathed in, and let the cold fill her lungs. Then she walked forward and sat down. The wood was cold through her coat. She placed her gloved hands on her knees and stayed still, letting the memory rise without fighting it. The dizziness, the sudden weakness, the terrifying loss of control. It passed through her like a shadow and then, unexpectedly, loosened. She was still here. A soft exhale left her lips, something between a laugh and a sigh. Footsteps crunched on the path. Ethan Cole approached from the far side of the park, hands in his jacket pockets, pace unhurried. He looked healthier than he had weeks earlier. Color back in his face, the constant tension eased from his shoulders. His right arm still bore the faint stiffness of injury, but it no longer defined his movement. Rook walked beside him. The German shepherd's coat had grown back over the shaved patch on his shoulder, the scar beneath barely visible unless you knew where to look. His gait was smooth, confident, tail level, and relaxed. Around his neck hung a simple ribbon, blue and silver, attached to a small metal medallion that caught the light when he moved. They stopped a respectful distance away. "You don't have to," Lily began. "I know," Ethan said gently. "Just thought I'd walk through." She nodded, appreciative. Rook sat on command, amber eyes steady on Lily. She held his gaze for a long moment, then reached out. He leaned into her hand, warm and solid, a quiet anchor. Later that afternoon, the town gathered in the community hall. It wasn't a ceremony with uniforms and speeches, just neighbors filling folding chairs, boots stacked near the door, kids whispering too loudly. The mayor, a round man with thinning hair and earnest eyes, stood near the front, holding a note card he never once looked at. He cleared his throat. "We don't have medals for this sort of thing," he said, voice wavering, "but we do have gratitude." Rook was called forward first. The room laughed softly as Ethan guided him up, the dog's ears flicking at the noise. The mayor knelt awkwardly, hands trembling as he slipped the ribbon over Rook's head. The medallion rested against the dog's chest, engraved simply, "For loyalty and courage." Rook accepted it with the dignified patience of someone who didn't care much for symbols, but understood intention. The applause was long and unrestrained. Ethan didn't look at the crowd. He watched Lily instead, saw the way her hand covered her mouth, eyes bright but steady. When the clapping finally faded, the mayor turned to Ethan. "There's a place here if you want it," he said. "Not a job offer, just a place." Ethan considered that. He had spent years moving between missions, bases, countries. Always temporary, always ready to leave. The idea of being asked to stay, not as a weapon, not as a solution, but as a person, felt strange, heavy, good. "I think," he said slowly, "I'd like that." The words surprised him as much as anyone else. Spring crept closer. Snow melted into streams along the roads. The lake ice broke apart with deep, echoing cracks that carried across the valley. One morning, Ethan woke to birdsong instead of wind. He brewed coffee in the small rental cabin on the edge of town, the one he had meant to leave weeks ago. Rook lay near the door, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded. The ribbon hung from a hook by the window, catching sunlight. Ethan stepped outside with his mug and looked toward the mountains. He felt something settle. Not peace exactly, but belonging. That afternoon, Lily walked the park again. This time she wore her uniform jacket unzipped, letting the air touch her face. She paused at the bench, smiled once, and kept walking. At the edge of the path, Ethan and Rook waited. Rook trotted forward, tail wagging, no hesitation, no shadow left behind. The three of them moved on together, leaving the bench behind, winter finally loosening its hold on the town. And on them. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on frozen lakes or in raging storms. They happen quietly, in moments when fear takes hold, when exhaustion weighs heavy, and when someone chooses to stand up anyway. This story is a reminder that courage isn't always loud. It's the decision to help a stranger, to protect a place you've grown to love, and to stay when walking away would be easier. Loyalty, like Rook's, isn't something that can be commanded or programmed. It's earned through trust, kindness, and shared struggle. And healing, like Lily's, doesn't mean forgetting what hurt you. It means facing it and choosing to move forward. In everyday life, we may never face a blizzard or a poisoned lake, but we all face moments where our choices matter more than we realize. Be the person who stays. Be the one who protects. Be the quiet strength someone else needs. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Tell us in the comments, when was a moment of loyalty or courage that changed your life? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, second chances, and the bonds that carry us through the storm.